Imagine being Keir Starmer, already the most unpopular prime minister in recorded history, facing petitions demanding your removal, watching your own party plot your downfall, and then getting accused of literally diverting £3 billion of NHS funding to appease Donald Trump by making British taxpayers pay more for medicines they're already using. That's not hyperbole. That's the actual accusation being leveled right now by the Liberal Democrats, who are calling this a Trump tax that funnels money from frontline NHS services into the pockets of big pharmaceutical companies without bringing meaningful benefits to patients. At the beginning of December, the UK quietly agreed to pay 25% more for new medicines by 2035 to stop the US imposing trade tariffs on pharmaceutical products. And this deal was made without public debate, without parliamentary scrutiny, just Starmer deciding to hand over billions to keep Trump happy. And the absolute kicker? Independent experts suggest this won't actually bring lots of new drugs to the NHS, maybe 3 to 5 at most, but it will massively increase what we pay for existing medications. So buckle up, because we're diving into how Starmer allegedly sold out the NHS to avoid a trade war with America, why the Liberal Democrats are furious enough to demand the deal be scrapped, what this actually means for patients and taxpayers, and whether this is pragmatic international deal-making or just another example of a government putting political expediency over public interest. This is UK Political Insight, and honestly, the timing of this controversy couldn't be worse for a PM already drowning in scandals. Let's start by understanding what this deal actually involves, because the details matter when you're talking about billions of pounds and fundamental changes to how the NHS decides which medicines to fund. At the beginning of December, the UK government agreed to increase the threshold that the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence uses to assess whether medicines can be offered by the NHS. NICE is the organization that evaluates whether drugs provide good value for money, essentially deciding which treatments the NHS will pay for based on their cost effectiveness. Currently, NICE uses a threshold of £20,000 to £30,000 per quality adjusted life year, which is a measure of how much health benefit a treatment provides. Under the new deal, this threshold increases by 25% to £25,000 to £35,000 per QWALY. What does that actually mean in practice? Well, it means drugs that were previously considered too expensive relative to the health benefits they provide will now be deemed acceptable. Pharmaceutical companies will be able to charge more for their medications because the threshold for what counts as cost-effective has been artificially raised. The government frames this as enabling NICE to approve innovative medicines that deliver significant health improvements, but might have been declined on cost-effectiveness grounds. That sounds positive, right? More access to cutting-edge treatments for patients who need them, except the Liberal Democrats and various experts are saying that's not really what's happening. What's actually happening, they argue, is that we're going to pay more for drugs we're already using, not get access to dramatically more new treatments. The cost estimates are where things get really contentious. The government claims this will cost around £1 billion a year by 2029, which is significant but perhaps manageable in the context of the NHS's overall budget. However, the Lancet Medical Journal, which is one of the most prestigious medical publications in the world, has estimated the cost at $3 billion. That's triple what the government is admitting to. Now, exact costs will depend on how many medicines get approved under the new system, how pharmaceutical companies price their products, and various other factors that are difficult to predict. But there's a massive gap between $1 billion and $3 billion. And given this government's track record with honesty and transparency, you can understand why critics are more inclined to believe the Lancet's higher figure. Daisy Cooper, the Liberal Democrat deputy leader, absolutely unloaded on this deal with some of the most pointed political criticism we've heard in a while. She said taxpayers' money was being rerouted at the request of Donald Trump from frontline NHS services into the pockets of big pharmaceutical companies. That's not subtle criticism. That's accusing the government of corruption, or at least of prioritizing American political pressure over British public health. The Trump tax framing is brilliant politically because it ties the cost directly to appeasing a foreign leader who's deeply unpopular with significant segments of the British public, while also making it sound like an unjust levy being imposed on hard-working taxpayers. Cooper called it outrageous that the agreement was made without any public debate or parliamentary scrutiny, describing it as just a decision by the Labour Prime Minister Keir Starmer. And she's right to highlight highlight this because major changes to NHS policy that will cost billions of pounds should presumably go through some democratic process. MPs should debate it. Experts should be consulted publicly. The public should have the opportunity to understand what's being proposed and why. Instead, this was done quietly in December, probably hoping it would get lost in the noise of Christmas and New Year. That's not transparent governance. That's hoping nobody notices until it's too late to change course. Cooper's call to scrap this $3 billion Trump tax and instead invest in social care is smart politics, because social care is a crisis everyone acknowledges needs addressing. The system is broken. Local authorities can't afford adequate care. Families are bankrupted by care costs, and successive governments have promised to fix it without actually doing so. By positioning the choice as between paying drug companies more and fixing social care, Cooper's creating a clear value contrast that resonates with voters. Who's going to choose enriching drug companies over helping elderly people receive proper care? Her assessment that this money will not bring lots of new drugs to the NHS is particularly damning. She said independent experts suggest it could just be 3 or 4, possibly 5 at most. What this money will do is simply increase the amount of money that we will pay for the existing drugs that we use, and it will be rerouted from frontline services. If that's accurate, and she's citing independent experts, so presumably has some basis for the claim, then this isn't about expanding access to innovative treatments. It's about pharmaceutical companies charging more for drugs we already use, with the NHS and ultimately taxpayers footing the bill. That's not health policy. That's corporate welfare funded by the public purse. The context of why this deal exists is important. Trump and his administration have been aggressive with trade policy, threatening tariffs on various products from countries he believes are treating America unfairly. Pharmaceutical products were apparently on the target list for potential U.S. tariffs against Britain. If those tariffs were imposed, it could have significant economic consequences for British pharmaceutical companies and potentially disrupt drug supplies. So the government faced a choice: accept Trump's pressure to change drug pricing policy or face trade conflict with America, including tariffs that could hurt British industry. They chose to cave to the pressure, which, depending on your perspective, is either pragmatic realism or cowardly surrender. The government's defense is that this enables and incentivizes life sciences companies to continue investing and innovating in the UK. Science Secretary Liz Kendall made that exact argument, positioning this as being about maintaining Britain's position in the global pharmaceutical industry. If we don't agree to these terms, the argument goes, companies will invest elsewhere, will lose jobs, lose research capacity, lose economic benefits. There's probably some truth to that. Pharmaceutical companies are global entities that can locate their operations wherever conditions are most favorable. If Britain becomes an unattractive market because of low prices, they might redirect investment to countries that are more profitable for them. But here's the counter-argument. Why should the NHS, which is chronically underfunded and struggling to provide basic services, subsidize pharmaceutical company profits through artificially inflated drug prices? These are some of the most profitable corporations in the world. They charge Americans absurd amounts for medications, often 10 times what other countries pay, because the US healthcare system allows it. Now they want Britain to move toward that model, paying more not because the drugs are better or more innovative, but because it's more profitable for them. And the UK government is apparently willing to facilitate that in order to avoid a trade war with Trump. The claim from Whitehall sources that the hike in drug prices won't be paid for out of budgets for the NHS services, but from hundreds of millions given to the NHS last year, specifically to cover early costs, is interesting, but ultimately unconvincing. Money is fungible. Saying these specific pounds come from this specific pot rather than that one doesn't change the fact that the NHS is receiving billions less than it would have otherwise, or is paying billions more for drugs than it would have otherwise. If the government adds hundreds of millions of pounds to give the NHS to cover drug cost increases, why not just give the NHS that money to spend on whatever provides them most health benefit, whether that's drugs, more doctors, better equipment, or reducing waiting lists? NHS leaders initially backed the government's assessment that this would lead to tens of thousands of patients receiving groundbreaking new drugs, which sounds great. But they also warned that the NHS receives too little funding to absorb the costs, and that care, services, and treatment budgets must not be rated. That second part is crucial because it's NHS leaders saying this might sound good in theory, but we don't have the money for it and you better not take it from existing services, which suggests they're skeptical that the government will actually provide adequate funding, and they're preemptively warning that patient care will suffer if this deal proceeds without proper resourcing. The absence of public debate or parliamentary scrutiny is genuinely concerning regardless of your view on the policy itself. Major changes affecting billions of pounds and fundamental NHS operations should be transparent. The fact that this was done quietly suggests the government knew it would be controversial and wanted to avoid the fight. But avoiding democratic accountability for controversial decisions is not acceptable governance. If the deal is good policy, defend it publicly. If it requires trade-offs, explain them honestly. Don't sneak it through in December hoping nobody notices until it's implemented. Cooper's accusation that the government is all spin and no substance and has held only one meeting on social care, despite promising cross-party talks a year ago, is a separate but related point. It highlights a pattern of promising action and delivering nothing, or delivering things nobody asked for, while ignoring things everyone agrees needs addressing. Social care reform has been promised by every government for years. Labor specifically committed to fixing it. Instead, they're diverting billions to pharmaceutical companies to appease Trump, while social care remains broken. That's a legitimate criticism of priority setting and political courage. The broader issue this raises is about sovereignty and Britain's relationship with America post-Brexit. One of the arguments for leaving the EU was regaining